Good afternoon. Good evening, actually. Mr. Saunders, good afternoon, everyone that is watching our broadcast. My name is Britney McDonald, and I am the project manager within the Integrated Health Outreach Organization, a nonprofit that is based here in Antigua and Barbuda. And we are committed to the work that needs to be done within our communities so that we have a voice for persons who are impacted by gender-based violence. And so this evening, our discussion continues on as part of our awareness campaign for gender-based violence and acknowledging that it does exist in Antigua and Barbuda, and we need to bring it to the forefront so that persons will feel comfortable joining the cause and also reporting as well that needs to happen. So this evening, I am joined by the Director of Gender Affairs, Mr. Jamie Saunders. Thank you so much for joining us this evening and taking the time to meet with us to bring awareness about what the Directorate of Gender Affairs has been doing in Antigua and Barbuda and some of the services that are available here. So first, I'd like you to introduce yourself, Mr. Saunders, and share some of the background on what the Directorate of Gender Affairs has been doing for our audience here this evening.
Hi, good evening, Brittany. Thanks for introducing me and for the invitation to speak tonight. So, as you said, my name is Jamie Saunders. I'm currently the Director of Gender Affairs in Antigua and Barbuda. The department has a mandate of promoting gender equality, women's empowerment, as well as coordinating a national response towards addressing gender-based violence. And we primarily do this through the Support and Referral Center, which is a one-stop mechanism in which survivors of gender-based violence can access medical, legal, and psychosocial services from one convenient location, from a trained sexual assault response team that comprises our referral partners, such as NGOs, such as medical practitioners, law enforcement, legal practitioners, etc. And we also do this to the creation of policies as well as to adherence and reporting to international gender equality frameworks, many of which entail or encompass certain requirements that it has for the country to undertake in order to ensure we are meeting the needs of survivors um, and evolving with different trends globally that we're seeing in terms of best practices to address the problem.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And I know that our audience is very eager to hear about some of the services and how they can access it. They may know someone who is impacted by gender-based violence, and they would want to be able to share that information with them. And so I think having you as our first guest is so important because we are having actions here in Antigua and Barbuda to support persons who are impacted by gender-based violence. But of course, I know that there's a lot more that we can also do in this regard. So before we continue, I wanted to touch base on the event that is upcoming on a Saturday, March 9th. 2024 in commemoration of International Women's Day. And so this is again a partnership alongside the Directorate of Gender Affairs where we want men and women to come out and support the awareness of gender-based violence in Antigua and Barbuda. You can register for the event and ensure that you are able to participate. You can have your coworkers join you, family and friends. And so in Antigua, it is March 9th. We'll be gathering at the Botanical Gardens at 3 p.m. And then in Barbuda, we'll be gathering at the Fisheries Complex at 11 a.m. And that is on March 16th. So we'll discuss more about the event as well a bit later on in the program for this evening. But first, I wanted to go into some more questions with you, Mr. Saunders, about gender-based violence in Antigua and Barbuda, and just educating our audience about what is gender-based violence. And that way our audience will be able to connect and understand if they have ever experienced it, as well as if they know anyone else who may have been impacted by it. So can you share some of the definitions and some of the examples around what gender-based violence is? I know that that's a question we should definitely address first and foremost.
Yeah, so gender-based violence now is a very popular and relevant term. There are different definitions that you will see out there depending on where you look or who you talk to, but primarily, my definition and how our organization looks at it is that gender-based violence is any harmful act that's perpetrated against somebody, and that is typically characterized by some level of power imbalance or due to a nonconformity to certain social constructions and expectations. And it can be not only physical, it can be verbal, it can be emotional, psychological, financial, etc. Um, and so that in essence is how we tend to describe it. So one of the important things to, I think, remember in terms of the term is that there's oftentimes a power imbalance, and it oftentimes has to do with a lack of conformity in terms of certain societal expectations that are very gender oriented and very stereotypical in nature at times.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much for that. And I agree with your definition, and I think that's what that our organization at IHO Integrated Health Outreach also agree with, and that it's an unequal power dynamic and it can impact both physically, sexually, economically, looking at finance, as well as encompass human trafficking, and other forms that aren't necessarily spoken about actively within our society. So I think next I would want to find out, what are some of the support services that are available through the Directorate of Gender Affairs, and any collaborations and partnerships that you've had in the past, that would have assisted in having those services for Antiguans and Barbudans.
Yeah, so in terms of support services that we offer to the Support and Referral Center, persons are able to get protection orders. So, if you're in fear of your life, you're being harassed, you're being abused, you're able to get a protection order that would prohibit the person legally from being able to be, within a certain amount of feet of you. Additionally, we also offer court advocacy. So our support officers within the Support and Referral Center are actually able to, join you in court, support you to the process, let you know what to expect. Within the center, we have attached to us just the Special Victim Support Unit, which is an arm of the police force that's specifically mandated and trained to deal with sexual assault, that form of gender-based violence. And so they work along hand in hand quite closely with us in terms of conducting investigations, interviews within the SAC space. And we also offer referrals in terms of being able to get legal support through those options, whether private or in terms of some of the public resources available. And when we have clients that may come in seeking support, that the type of support they need may not necessarily be aligned with the services we offer, we still have our referral pathway where maybe if it's child and they need to be referred to family and social services, or it's somebody and they're not comfortable with the government system, we can refer them to a partner like Women Against Rape, or maybe there's a fear of STDs being involved, we can refer to Planned Parenthood. So we have a diverse and very cross-cutting set of referral partners that also work along with us to meet the needs of our clients.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. One of the areas that you pointed out that piqued my interest was in regards to getting support in a court case as well as legal support. Can you dive in a bit more in that regard? Because I think that we often look at the barriers as well, at IHO for the reporting and being a part of the process of getting support and looking at the legal aspect, of course, to the average person, they'll be like, well, I have to pay a lawyer. The lawyer charges hourly. So that is definitely a very impactful and supportive service. So can you share some more about the legal support that the Directorate of Gender Affairs has provided?
Yeah, so we work along with legal aid, we work along with legal affairs, and from time to time, we also have one or two private lawyers or legal practitioners that are willing to support the clients in terms of whatever their legal needs may be. You know, as you said, sometimes it can be costly to get that type of legal support or intervention. And so, you know, we have established different relationships in terms of both public and private legal support to ensure that, you know, we can always provide some level of legal intervention for clients that need that type of help. And we also have our support team that actually sit in on the case, on the court sessions with the clients, if that is something that they want, because sometimes you take for granted just having the person that helped you through the process to get to that point when you're in court, be there with you, be able to offer you that type of emotional support. And as persons who have been through many of these court cases and assisted many people in similar situations as the respective survivor, they're able to give advice and kind of help walk them through the process, even while in the midst of, you know, the judicial setting.
Wonderful. I think that the emotional aspect is also very important to consider because you would have been through a traumatic experience. And even if it was in one day or over the course of 1 year, you still would want to have that support for survivors of gender-based violence. So looking at our community, I would also want us to consider any support services for the marginalized or the vulnerable populations. Are there any considerations for the backgrounds of persons who have been impacted by gender-based violence and this how they receive the support and allowing them to also become aware of the services at the Directorate of Gender Affairs?
Okay, so to clarify, you're asking about vulnerable persons' access to the services.
Yes, yes.
But you can inclusive approach. So we understand that, you know, persons, for instance, from within the LGBT community, persons living with disabilities, you know, immigrants, all of these type of persons have different challenges or barriers that may constrain them from coming from services, or that may even affect their perception of what type of treatment that they may get if they actually come to us for services. But we definitely have a non-discriminatory approach and a very open is welcome to come in, and we've always tried to amplify that move in terms of the approach that we've taken to advertising our services to persons. So irrespective of your age, your gender, your ethnicity, you know, your sexual orientation, you're able to access services at Gender Affairs at the Support and Referral Center. And we encourage persons to come and seek help if they need it.
Thank you so much for sharing that information. In regards to the confidentiality and privacy, because again, for persons who are from marginalized communities, as you mentioned, immigrants, the LGBTQ community as well, that would be one of the considerations and factors, and even for men and women in terms of reporting. So what is the stance on having a private experience for both reporting and even going through the court proceedings and the counseling that persons would receive? How does the Directorate of Gender Affairs ensure that there is confidentiality across the process?
Yeah, so confidentiality is certainly of utmost importance, and we definitely have um, confidentiality waivers and forms to ensure that we maintain this type of, discretion and privacy that both all staff members of gender affairs as well as clients sign, just so that we can establish that mutual trust and confidence that would assure the client that not only is them coming in for services going to be private in terms of the conversation and the atmosphere, but also in terms of the documentation. If any type of establishment or institution requests their information, there's a procedure that follows the release of that information that includes their consent before anything like that would be disclosed. And so, we try to follow, you know, minimum standards in terms of international best practices in that respect. And so clients can be assured that, their privacy and their confidentiality will certainly be respected, both in terms of paperwork, in terms of the staff that work at Gender Affairs, and in terms of the atmosphere as well that we try to create when they do come in physically to access the services.
Okay, great. Yes. And when the IHL GBV coalition team did some of our street promotions, that was one of the concerns when we engaged with citizens. It was about confidentiality across the board and also privacy, being concerned that their business and sensitive information would make it to other channels. So whether through their friends or family or even at their church. So that's the reason why it's so important to hear directly from the Directorate of Gender Affairs that there is considerable amount of action towards ensuring that there's training involved for confidentiality as well as privacy. So thank you so much for that. I will pause here just to note that we are being joined by persons who are interested in and have signed up for the event on March 9th. And I do invite you to share your questions in the chat. And also, if you are joining us on Facebook, you can comment under the live. We will review the questions that you have and, as time permits, answer questions that you may have for Mr. Saunders or about the event. And to the best of our knowledge, we will also share those answers and feedback for you. So please feel free to take some time based on the conversation that we've had so far to place your questions in the chat, whether you are in the Facebook live or you are on the Zoom live. So thank you so much for taking the time to join us for this most important discussion. And we'll review that towards the end of the session. Thank you. Okay, so Mr. Saunders, I wanted to also touch on areas for reporting and specific information. So if someone is experiencing gender-based violence, how can they get in touch with the Directorate of Gender-Based Affairs, or should they also contact law enforcement, their lawyer? What's the general process? Walk me through it.
If you want to directly engage with the directorate, you can call us on our hotline, which is 24 hours, and the number is 463-5555. That's 463-5555. And when the person answers on the hotline, you basically just explain the situation that you're facing, and based on the context of the circumstances, it may be a situation where we can immediately mobilize support in terms of police intervention. If it's something that's not necessarily posing you imminent danger, it can be that we let you come in the next day and we address whatever situation you have in person. Or it could just be that, quite frankly, you're facing abuse and you're just at the point where you just want to explain the situation and you don't necessarily want to take any action, but you just want to hear what options you do have when you do reach to that point. That type of support is available as well. So the hotline is a good avenue. You can also just walk into our office, which is located on Old Parham Road, in between Global Garden as well as First Caribbean Bank. And the best time to be able to come in is between 8 to 12. And again, we have the hotline 24 hours. So based on the gravity of the situation, you may be able to get support after that time as well. Women Against Rape is also an entry point for getting support generally. And so you can reach out to them. Obviously, you can also directly reach out to the police, calling, 911 or whatever, respective village police station, if it's a situation of it making more sense to contact the one closest to you. So there are different entry points. But to reach us directly, you can walk in or you can call the hotline.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing the hotline. Again, it is 463-555545. And I've also posted it in the chat here in our Zoom, and it will be posted under the live on Facebook as well. So again, that number is 463-5555. And that is how you can contact the Director of Gender Affairs so that you can receive support. Mr. Saunders, moving into our next section, wanting to find out in terms of preventative measures, what educational resources are available, as well as actions or programs that are currently being done by the Directorate of Gender Affairs. I know we have our collaboration with the IHO-GBV Coalition. But can you speak to some of the previous collaborations and educational programs that currently exist to help raise awareness?
Yeah, so we try to be very proactive. We understand that we have different observances, whether it's Women's Day, whether it's 16 days of activism, that allow for a platform to be able to amplify these issues and to develop initiatives. So we do use these platforms as opportunities for that. And we also, throughout the year and through the Support and Referral Center, try to execute programs and initiatives that also help to prevent gender-based violence. So one of the things is the Support and Referral Center support program. And last year, through that program, we did a self-defense class with the Shoturati Academy, which we did right before Carnival to allow people to develop their self-defense capacity. And we also, under that program, would have done yoga because a part of gender-based violence and past the abuse, getting your due process legally, it leaves a certain level of trauma and pain in certain instances. And so we developed a yoga course under that program to help people refine their coping capacity to be able to effectively deal with the implications that the abuse may have had on them. We also do a lot of outreach in schools, to community groups, to church groups, sometimes on request and sometimes by us just inquiring if we can go into the community, because we understand it's important to meet people where they are at to get the message across. Uh, and outside of that, I think just talking about the Support and Referral Center, that combination of things is what we typically do to try and prevent, GBV. One of the things we want to do this year with support from UN Women is a perpetrator rehabilitation program, because a lot of times we look at response after the abuse has happened, but we tend to have institutional gaps in terms of prevention. And so across the region, there's been a Partnership for Peace program that was piloted by UN Women, and it's been basically proven to reduce recidivism rates amongst offenders. And so we want to recreate that kind of model in Antigua. The NGO Together We Must did a similar program last year, and we did support it in terms of having one or two of the facilitators being from gender affairs as well. And I think that that program was well received from all indications from those who took part. And so that's something we want to see institutionalized here in Antigua, rehabilitation of persons who either have abused persons not compelled by the court to do it, or on their own, voluntary basis want to actually get that type of help to change the behavior.
Right. And I think that's an important discussion for us to expound on. I do see that we are getting questions in our Zoom chat, and we'll also check our Facebook Live in a moment. But in terms of looking at it from both the survivors of gender-based violence, but also the preventative measures of the perpetrators, and ensuring that they are rehabilitated, and also raising awareness, because in our culture and in our society, there are sayings and tenets that we are introduced to from a young age. And so it is about educating ourselves and also the next generation so that it's not continued, you know? So I think, would you mind sharing a bit more about the program with Together We Must that you would have engaged with?
Yeah, so that program was basically looking at transforming the behaviors and the mindsets of, in that instance, in that program, men who would have either one perpetrated abuse, um, and they would have been compelled through the court as a condition of like probation to go through the program, or persons are referred by one of the social services agencies, or they would have just volunteered, recognizing that maybe they have certain behaviors and they want to try to mitigate it before, it ends up becoming violent. And I think Together We Must, they would have established a very specific system in which the facilitators are basically operating off of an established set of principles in terms of different exercises that they do with the men, different counseling strategies, because psychosocial support was one of the aspects that they did with the men. Also looking at doing group sessions with the men. So there's also that peer-to-peer accountability. They can look at some of the similarities and nuances between, the situations that would have all led them to be in this space. And there was also case management, so that Together We Must could also monitor the progress of the individual perpetrator and be able to, file a report and really document the progress that they would have made from when the program would have started up until the time that, it would have reached its culmination.
Okay, great. And so I do see that one of the questions in the chat is asking about a rehabilitation for perpetrators, and that's what we're discussing now. So thinking about, is this a long-term program, or was it a project that received support? Is it something that we can look forward to continuing?
So that program Together We Must did, it was funded, so it was more short term. But one of the things that I would have raised with them is that I would have wanted a lot of the data, a lot of the information, both qualitative and quantitative, that they collected as a result of doing that program, to kind of use that as a base of evidence to take to the policymakers and the powers that be as justification for the need to institutionalize people. We can have the perpetrator program, be a long-term sustainable framework.
Okay, great. So on my end, Mr. Saunders, my internet connection would have cut out for a second. Would you mind repeating that last bit for us to ensure we have
Yeah.
that information?
Yeah, so I was just saying that one of the things that we would want to do is to work along with NGO partners so that we're making sure we're not working in silos or duplicating efforts. And I think that would help in terms of maximizing limited resources that we all have at our disposal and ensure more sustainability in terms of once we actually get a program like that, off the ground.
Great, thank you so much. My next question is in regards to any shelters or any spaces that are available for the victims of gender-based violence, if it is that their case requires it, because often we see where gender-based violence can continue if you are still, of course, in the space with your perpetrator. And or your abuser, I should say. So are there any spaces available in Antigua and Barbuda or any plans to have any spaces?
Yeah, so that's a challenge. I think over the years, there have been different, for lack of a better term, transitional models of support for persons who need emergency accommodation. But it's been a challenge in terms of sustaining that type of support, just based on both financial resources being limited, as well as looking at it from the context of the size of our country and, safety implications in terms of how difficult it can be sometimes to maintain that level of discussion about where somebody is. But what we currently do is in emergency situations, in very desperate situations, we work along with one or two service providers within the accommodation industry that will allow us to house, vulnerable persons for, anything from 2 nights to a week. Um, to kind of offer them support while they figure out a more long-term solution. So this is a real institutional challenge. It's one of the things we've been advocating for to the policymakers. And so we'll continue to do that because it's a very important issue and we don't want to wait until the worst happens and somebody makes a report, they seek accommodation, they don't get it, they go back with their partner and then the worst happens and then we build a shelter. We want to do something or develop some kind of model before that happens. And so we will continue, advocating and agitating to that end. I know in like other countries, sometimes they utilize a national housing stock or they work along with hotels or, just figure out something that works and that is feasible in terms of your population size, confidentiality, and resources to make sure everything is feasible and sustainable and safe.
Great, thank you so much. And I appreciate that even though there may not be a specific facility at this time, that the Director of Gender Affairs is working along with accommodation partners so that there is some opportunity for victim survivors to escape that particular situation that they're in. So I know that there's also a question along the lines of what if it's a child that is experiencing gender-based violence? Is there specific support that's given in that case? And how does the directorate handle those situations for children or minors, persons under 18 that would be experiencing GBV?
Yeah, so in those situations, what we do is refer to family and social services. So they have the mandate of dealing with children and addressing those issues. And sometimes it may be a situation where we could also refer to the social work department at the hospital that also looks at those issues and they also work along closely with family and social services as well. So, you know, we are an entry point, but we don't necessarily offer those specific services. We just guide you in the right direction and also stay in touch just to make sure you're getting the support that you need from those agencies that we'll be referring you to in those situations.
Great. Thank you so much, Mr. Saunders. I really appreciate you giving our audience a great overview of the services that the Director of Gender Affairs provides. So I do want to next dive into some of the questions that have been asked by the group. One question here is asking for some more information about the referral system. And their example is a student who reports to a teacher of abuse at home who is responsible for the reporting slash referral in this case.
Yeah, so typically, I mean, in that specific scenario, it goes back to us referring to family and social services. So if the person comes into gender affairs, family and social services at this moment is located within the same building as us. And so we would be able to take the person up. We would still gather certain information so that we can also give the relevant context towards the social worker or the case management officer at FFSD, and then they would kind of take it from there. In other situations, if it is that the person needs legal support, we'll be able to call the attorney or the legal entity and be able to, again, explain the situation to them, link them with the client. If the client is having any issues, once we connect them, we can reach out on their behalf to ensure that the support is being redirected towards them. And similar situation with, NGO partners, etc. We basically serve as the connector through providing information to the partner that we're referring the person to. We also have referral forms that we would fill out so that the agency we're referring to has all of the pertinent information. And then we stay in touch to make sure that the client is receiving the support that they seek. So it's pretty straightforward. And we have forms and paperwork as well as follow-up contact with the client and the agency to ensure that continuity and that seamless transition of support.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mr. Saunders, for sharing that information. And so I do see that the other question regarding the rehabilitation program for perpetrators, we have addressed that. And just checking over at our Facebook Live if we have any questions there as well. I know that we would have had a few participants join on so that they can hear about what the Director of Gender Affairs has been doing in Antigua and Barbuda and some of the services. So please feel free to share any questions that you have for Mr. Saunders in the Zoom chat or on Facebook Live for our audience on Facebook, and he will be able to share some more information along the lines of what the Director of Gender Affairs is doing. And a part of our collaboration and partnership is, again, raising awareness of gender-based violence here in Antigua and Barbuda. It is something that impacts our community and the Caribbean at large. There have been, of course, statistics that share that the Caribbean is #2 in gender-based violence based on our population and the level of impact that it's had, but they're very limited, I would say, studies that have been done or reporting information that we've received because of the type of culture and the society that we have, the concerns in regards to confidentiality and privacy. So those are some of the factors that are currently at play. So we are doing our IHOGBV Coalition 5K walk. We're saying men and women, come out, be united in stopping gender-based violence, ending the silence. We want to have a great turnout for the event, again, because we want to demonstrate to the persons who've been affected or experienced gender-based violence that we stand in solidarity with them as a nation, as a people, and not just women coming out, but also men, because men are a part of the solution as well. And we want to ensure that we have both men and women present at the event and showcasing that we stand united together. I do see some questions coming into the chat, and so we will address those. But Mr. Saunders, a question in regards to some of the statistics. Is there anything that you're able to share specific to Antigua and Barbuda in terms of the number of cases that you have received over the last year, for example, or maybe on a monthly basis, the number of persons who access the support services? Are there any statistical information that the directorate has available for our audience this evening?
Yeah, well, we do collect sex disaggregated data in terms of the number of clients that access the services at the support and referral center and the type of gender-based violence that they are facing. I don't have the stats in front of me at the moment, but I can tell you um, between 2019, 2020, well, between 2019 and 2023, basically, I would say we had an average of about maybe 140 cases in terms of persons coming to the support and referral center. One of the gaps that we have nationally is that um, when the support and referral center was established in 2017, we established the national database for GBV, which is supposed to encompass data from ourselves, the police, and women against rape, which are the main entry points. However, we're not very cohesive right now in terms of all entering the data into the database as meticulously as possible. And so all of the data collected is not going to be as representative as it should be because it's not, all of the different entry points being collated into one. However, we can talk about our statistics from the SARC. And again, between maybe 2019 and 2023, we saw an average of about 140. I know in 2021, we saw a drop off from the previous year where COVID had started. And I think that we looked at that as not necessarily that there was less gender-based violence, but just understanding the type of ramifications that COVID would have had on people's ability to report with some of the physical limitations that would have presented problems, obviously, along with just general underreporting. And I think last year we had about 80, 90 odd, which is another big drop off. However, we understand that we moved to a new location. And so even today, there may still be a lot of people that don't necessarily know where we are, or because we're not in the heart of town anymore, maybe it's not as accessible to certain people who have financial limitations to maybe get transportation. And so that's a snapshot of our statistics for the past few years. The thing about statistics as well is that it can be very subjective in terms of the analysis attached to it, particularly in terms of gender-based violence, because we understand that one, there's a lot of underreporting. Two, a lot of people don't know that they're facing abuse. And I think all of those factors combined lead to a distorted picture of just how pervasive the issue is.
Thank you so much for that. And to point out, you mentioned that the Director of Gender Affairs moved, so I think this is a great opportunity to share the current location where persons would be able to go and receive services or speak with someone in regards to their issue and find out more.
Yeah, so we're located on Old Parham Road, and it's in between the Global Garden food place as well as First Caribbean Bank. The building is an NNL building, and it's located where Ryan's Home Office Depot used to be. We're actually hoping and trying to transition, moving back into our original location, just understanding and respecting feedback we've gotten from people in terms of accessibility, convenience, and all of that. And even the fact that that building was certain things were done construction wise to make it specifically be tailored for the support and referral center. And so we're actually hoping to move back there just so we can ensure we're better meeting the needs in a more efficient way than we are now, and also even in a better way than we were the first time we were in that building, with more improvements being made. But for now, it's Old Parham Road in between First Caribbean and Global Garden, where Home Office Depot used to be.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. And I'm sure that that information is going to help someone who is either listening via Facebook or a part of our Zoom today. I do see that we have a few questions, so going straight in, the first one is there a halfway house for persons, adult, male, female, or youngsters who are facing gender-based violence? I know that you would have touched on this, but would you just remind the audience and share this information again? I think it's very important as it's resurfaced.
Yeah, so persons who are facing emergency or desperate situations. They have no family or friends that they can stay by for a transitionary period. We have arrangements with accommodation providers in which, on a very short-term basis, we can provide some support in that respect, where they can get, like a safe haven for anything for maybe 2 to 5 days. And then thereafter, they would have to transition into something a bit more sustainable, and we can do what we can to support in that process. But that's the situation currently. Once that's to do with children, family and social services, we try to support in terms of any kind of emergency placement. So that's the situation currently.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mr. Saunders. The next question is in regards to law enforcement. Is there ongoing training for police officers in dealing with gender-based violence?
But I know normally every year when the police force has new recruits, they go through an actual multiple day gender-based violence specific training. And we're normally invited, whether ceremonially or to facilitate a session. And as well, in the past, we've done a lot of training with the police. I will say, just being transparent, we haven't done as much in previous years, but that's something that this year, as well as going forward, we want to do a lot more of, because we understand that there's always evolving trends in gender-based violence. Police officers are always switching to different units and different posts. And so it's important for us to keep doing those refreshers and ensuring the capacity is there. So we haven't done as much as we could have the past maybe year or two, but that's something we're going to make a concerted effort to remedy this year and beyond.
Yes, wonderful. And even for the 5K walk that the IHO GBV Coalition, as well as the Director of Gender Affairs, is partnering on, at this walk, we do anticipate that we would have police presence there, not only for the safety, of course, of our participants, but just to show solidarity that, of course, police are and tend to get involved in the process in terms of victims reporting to the police as well, has even during the court process and those proceedings, then the reporting officer would perhaps need to testify. So it's a complete process that resolves into having a multi-stakeholder approach. So I think that's a very important question. And of course, we as a society, we want to know that our police officers are trained, that they understand the dynamics within not just even a home, but a family setting when it comes to gender-based violence and how to treat persons who are in that specific situation. So thank you so much for sharing that information. And I think it's something where we would be able to discuss more, even how IHO and other groups such as Women Against Rape would be able to continue to work with the Directorate of Gender Affairs in that particular regard. There is another question that's posted in the group. It's, are perpetrators made known to the public or relevant authorities based on, I would say, the actions that they would have done? So for example, the perpetrator would have served time in prison and has been released. Would the public know, or would, for example, in this situation, the school be informed that there is a release of that person who would have been a perpetrator of gender-based violence? Would they, specifically within this example, the situation involves a teacher and a student. So the teacher being the perpetrator, would he be put back in society has a teacher. So based on the level of gender-based violence or the gender-based violence that they would have committed in general. So two questions, it seems, is are perpetrators made known to the public? I'm also going to just add on, is there a database in that regard? I think this is also leaning in regards to sexual offenders as well. And then would they be rehabilitated into society and allowed to complete their profession, which would engage with minors?
Yeah, well, in terms of the sexual offenses, there is a recent bill that came into effect, the sexual offenses registry. And so the names of perpetrators can be made available and accessible upon formal correspondence being made out to the police commissioner with an explanation of why the information is being sought. And then on a discretionary basis after, assessing the correspondence and the request, a determination can be made about if the information is going to be released. So it is accessible in that sense, in terms of the sexual offenses, particularly in terms of when the survivor or the victim is a child. In terms of general gender-based violence, we don't currently operate a database of the perpetrators. We do have the information of certain perpetrators within our case files in terms of it being documented, certain instances of GBV would have committed against the respective survivor, but we don't have a dedicated database with a list of names. In terms of the public being able to access that information, I do believe that that information is public knowledge, in terms of if you seek that information in terms of somebody's criminal record and things of that nature, you should be able to access that. Once it's not against a child and the information is not being legally withheld because a minor, should be accessible a lot more easier than in instances. So I hope that answers the question.
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Saunders. So at this time, I would invite you to make any closing statements for our audience. It's been a real pleasure to have you be a part of the IHO GBV Coalition Facebook Lives, where we're able to hear about what is happening within the Directorate of Gender Affairs and connect that with the community where they can share questions. So any final statements or comments?
Yeah, so just thanking yourself and IHO for the opportunity to come and speak about the resources available and the work that we do, to let people know that if you're seeking support, irrespective of your age, your gender, your sexual orientation, etc., we have an inclusive approach and you're able to access services. We have a 24-hour hotline, that's 463-5555, that we can be reached on. And just to let everybody know that we're located on Old Parham Road once again, in between Global Garden and First Caribbean. And we're looking forward to continuing to offer services. Also just want to commend IHO for the work that they're doing and the work that they've been doing previously as well. They have the full support of the directorate, and we will be out and out and encourage others to be present, on March 9th for the event and to stand in solidarity.
Thank you so much, Mr. Saunders. And yes, we really do appreciate you joining us and taking your evening to share with our audience about the work and services of the Directorate of Gender Affairs. Our next broadcast will be with Barbudan Voices because we are having the walk as well in Barbuda, because gender-based violence happens both in Antigua and Barbuda, and we want to prevent it, we want to raise awareness. And so our next broadcast will be February 24th at 10:30 a.m. With Nurse Janita Cuffey as well as Ms. Tulip Lee, who will be sharing some insight on gender-based violence from that perspective as well. So thank you so much to our audience for joining us and sharing your questions, sharing this broadcast. It's really encouraging that we as a community can come together to discuss these issues and also receive such important information. So thank you all for joining us this evening, and I wish you a good night and a pleasant week.
Good night.
Good night, everyone. Take care.